The air hung thick with dust as Lucy Carter stumbled across the wooden platform, a crude price tag dangling from a cord around her neck. Wyoming Territory, 1878, a time when lawlessness and desperation often walked hand in hand. Her honey-blonde hair, once meticulously pinned, now fell in tangled waves past her shoulders, and her emerald eyes burned with a mixture of defiance and terror as she faced the crowd of leering men before her. $500 for this fine specimen, shouted Bartholomew Jenkins, the slave trader who'd captured her after the stagecoach ambush that had left her fellow passengers dead. Look at her. Educated, can read and write, perfect for any man wanting a proper lady or a saloon needing a fresh face. Lucy trembled but refused to lower her gaze. She'd been traveling west to take a position as a schoolteacher in Laramie when disaster struck. Now, instead of shaping young minds, she stood on an auction block like livestock, her worth reduced to a number scrawled on a tag. At the edge of the crowd, Thomas Dawson watched, his jaw clenched tight beneath his 3-day stubble. His weather-beaten Stetson cast a shadow over piercing blue eyes that had seen too much violence in 30 years of life. He'd come to Silver Gulch for supplies, not to witness this abomination. "Do I hear 600?" Jenkins called, grabbing Lucy's arm and turning her roughly. Thomas's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. The war between the states had ended 13 years ago, yet here stood a man selling another human being in broad daylight. His blood boiled, memories of his father's teachings about human dignity flooding back principles that had made their small Colorado ranch a haven for those fleeing oppression. 700, called a fat man with gold teeth. 8, shouted another. Thomas stepped forward through the crowd. "This ends now," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. With deliberate steps he mounted the platform. Jenkins sneered. "You bidding, mister?" Without answering, Thomas reached toward Lucy. She flinched, but instead of touching her, his fingers found the price tag. With a swift jerk, he tore it from her neck and crushed it in his fist. "No price could touch her worth," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His hand moved to his gun. "This woman is not for sale, not today, not ever." Jenkins's face contorted with rage. "You got no right. I paid good money to bring her here." "You're breaking the law," Thomas said evenly. "Slavery's illegal in every territory of this nation." "This ain't slavery," Jenkins protested. "It's domestic service contracting." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some men shuffled uncomfortably, suddenly aware they were witnessing something unconscionable in the light of day. "Step away from her," Thomas commanded, "or the undertaker will be measuring you before sundown." Lucy's eyes widened at the cowboy's intervention. Hope, fragile but persistent, sparked within her chest for the first time since the ambush. Jenkins calculated his odds, his gaze flicking between Thomas's steady hand hovering near his holstered Colt and the determined set of the cowboy's jaw. Slowly, he backed away. "Miss," Thomas said without taking his eyes off Jenkins, "I'd be obliged if you'd step behind me." Lucy didn't hesitate. She moved quickly, the tattered hem of her once fine blue dress dragging in the dust. "This ain't over," Jenkins hissed. "For your sake it better be," Thomas replied. He helped Lucy down from the platform, keeping himself between her and Jenkins. The crowd parted as they passed, some men looking ashamed, others resentful at the entertainment's end. "Thank you," Lucy whispered once they'd put some distance between themselves and the auction. "But they'll come after me after us." Thomas nodded grimly. "I reckon so. My horse is at the livery. Can you ride?" "Yes," she said, straightening her shoulders. "My father made sure I could ride before I could properly walk." A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips. "Good. We'll head to my ranch. It's 3 days' ride, but it's safe there." As they approached the livery stable, Lucy touched his arm. "Why did you do it? You don't know me. You've risked everything for a stranger." Thomas stopped and looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time not just as someone to save, but as a woman with courage glowing in her eyes despite everything she'd endured. "Because some things are worth standing for, Miss Carter," she supplied. "Lucy Carter." "Thomas Dawson," he replied with a slight tip of his hat. And no decent man could stand by while they put a price on something priceless. The livery owner, a grizzled man named Hank, eyed them suspiciously as Thomas paid for a second horse. "Heard there was some trouble at Jenkins's auction," he commented, accepting the coins. "Nothing that needed to happen in the first place," Thomas replied evenly. Hank's weathered face creased in what might have been approval. "Figured it was you causing the ruckus. You Dawsons always did have more principles than sense." He disappeared into a stall and returned leading a dappled mare. "She's steady. Won't give the lady any trouble." Lucy approached the horse, speaking softly as she stroked its nose. The animal nickered and pushed against her hand. "She likes you," Hank observed. "Pepper will do fine," Lucy said, the first genuine smile crossing her face since Thomas had met her. "How'd you know her name?" Hank asked, surprised. Lucy's hand paused on the horse's neck. "It's what I would have named her. She has these little speckles, like someone sprinkled pepper over her coat." Thomas found himself studying her with newfound interest. There was more to this schoolteacher than met the eye. They set off within the hour, supplies hastily gathered and lashed to their saddles. Thomas led them north out of town, taking a less traveled trail that wound through scrubby hills. They rode in silence until Silver Gulch disappeared from view. "They'll follow," Lucy said, not a question but a statement of fact. "Jenkins isn't the type to let go easily," Thomas agreed. "But we've got a head start, and I know this country better than most." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they rode, the rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk the only sounds breaking the silence. Lucy sat tall in her saddle despite her ordeal, and Thomas found his respect for her growing with each passing mile. As dusk approached, Thomas guided them into a sheltered ravine where a small stream trickled between rocks. "We'll camp here," he said, dismounting and helping Lucy down though she clearly didn't need assistance. Their fingers touched briefly during the exchange, and an unexpected current seemed to pass between them. Lucy withdrew her hand quickly, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I can help set up camp," she offered, busying herself with unpacking. Thomas nodded, trying to ignore the lingering sensation of her hand in his. "I'll see to the horses, then get a fire going." As night fell and a small fire cast dancing shadows against the ravine walls, Lucy accepted a tin cup of coffee from Thomas. "You haven't asked what happened," she observed, blowing gently on the steaming liquid. Thomas settled across from her, the firelight illuminating the strong planes of his face. "Figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Lucy stared into her cup, gathering her thoughts. "I was on my way to Laramie. I'd accepted a position at the new school there. The stagecoach was attacked 2 days ago. The driver and the other passengers, a merchant and an elderly couple, they were killed." Her voice caught, but she continued. "I hid under the seat. Jenkins and his men took me when they searched for valuables." "I'm sorry," Thomas said quietly. Lucy looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "They talked about selling me all the way to Silver Gulch, like I was a cow or a horse, not a person." Thomas's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "There are still men who think they can own others. The law says otherwise, but out here, law is only as strong as those willing to enforce it." "Like you did today," Lucy said softly. Thomas shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Any decent man would have done the same." "No," Lucy countered, "they wouldn't." There were at least 30 men at that auction. You were the only one who stepped forward." He had no answer for that. Instead, he busied himself with preparing their simple supper of beans and salt pork. As they ate, Lucy asked, "Tell me about your ranch." "You mentioned it was 3 days' ride from here." Thomas nodded, relaxing slightly with the change of subject. "Twin Pines. It's nestled in a valley with a view of the mountains. Not the biggest spread, but the land's good. Got about 60 head of cattle, some horses. My father started it after the war. He passed 2 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Lucy said sincerely. "He lived a good life," Thomas replied. "Taught me what mattered." He paused, then added, "You'll be safe there until we figure out your next steps." Lucy set down her empty plate. "I still want to go to Laramie. I gave my word I'd teach those children." Thomas regarded her with respect. "That's admirable, but Jenkins knows your destination now. Might not be safe." "I can't let fear dictate my life," Lucy said firmly. "Those children need education more than I need safety." Thomas couldn't help but smile at her determination. "We'll see what can be arranged, but first, let's get you to Twin Pines." They fell into a comfortable silence as the fire crackled and night creatures began their symphony. Thomas took the first watch, insisting Lucy get some rest. As she rolled herself in the blanket he'd provided, Lucy looked up at the cowboy silhouetted against the starlit sky. "Thank you, Thomas, not just for saving me, but for seeing me as a person worth saving." Something shifted in Thomas's chest at her words. "Get some sleep, Miss Carter." "We've got a long ride ahead." "Lucy," she corrected gently. "After today, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Lucy," he repeated, her name feeling right on his tongue. "Sleep well." Dawn broke with a painter's touch, streaking the sky in pink and gold. Lucy awakened to find Thomas already packing up camp, 2 tin cups of coffee waiting by the rekindled fire. "You should have woken me," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I could have helped." "You needed the rest," he replied simply. They set off as the sun cleared the horizon, riding harder than the previous day. Thomas kept them to lesser-known trails, occasionally doubling back or crossing streams to confuse any pursuit. By midday, they'd covered impressive ground. During a brief stop to rest the horses, Lucy noticed Thomas scanning the horizon, his expression troubled. "What is it?" she asked. "Dust cloud," he replied, pointing southeast. "Could be nothing. Could be riders." Lucy felt her stomach clench. "Jenkins, maybe. We'll keep moving." "There's an old line shack about 10 miles north. We can hole up there if needed." They mounted up quickly, pushing their horses as fast as was reasonable over the rough terrain. The line shack came into view as afternoon shadows began to lengthen a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. Thomas dismounted first, approaching cautiously with his hand near his gun. After checking inside, he motioned Lucy forward. "It's clear. We'll stay here tonight." The interior was Spartan but serviceable: a crude table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot, and a small fireplace. Thomas busied himself securing the horses in the lean-to out back while Lucy swept decades of dust from the floor with a branch fashioned into a makeshift broom. "It's not much," Thomas apologized when he returned, "but it's defensible if trouble comes." Lucy set down her improvised broom. "It's perfectly adequate. I'm not accustomed to luxury accommodations anyway." Thomas raised an eyebrow as he started a fire in the small hearth. "I thought Eastern ladies preferred feather beds and fine china." "I'm from Georgia, not New York," Lucy corrected with a small smile. "And while my family was comfortable before the war, we lost everything afterward. I've spent the last decade making my own way." Thomas looked chastened. "I shouldn't have assumed." "Most do," Lucy said without rancor. She hesitated, then asked, "May I help prepare dinner?" They worked together companionably, Thomas producing dried beef and hardtack from his saddlebags while Lucy found a forgotten canister of tea in the shack's small cupboard. The simple meal tasted better than it had any right to, perhaps enhanced by the growing ease between them. As night fell, Thomas checked outside one last time before barring the door. No sign of pursuit yet, but we should keep the fire low just in case. Lucy nodded, suddenly aware of how small the shack felt with just the two of them inside. The single cot seemed to dominate the space. Thomas noticed her glance and immediately said, "You take the cot. I'll be fine on the floor." "That's not necessary," Lucy began to protest. "It is," he interrupted firmly. "My father would haunt me if I took a bed while a lady slept on bare boards." Lucy smiled at that. "He sounds like a good man." "The best I've known," Thomas agreed, spreading his bedroll near the door positioned, Lucy realized, to intercept any intrusion. As they settled for the night, the small fire casting intimate shadows across the walls, Lucy found herself studying Thomas's profile. In the flickering light, the hard lines of his face softened, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the tough exterior. "Why did you become a rancher?" she asked softly. Thomas stared into the dying embers. "Never wanted to be anything else. There's something honest about working the land, raising cattle. You get back what you put in, more or less." He paused. "What about you? Why teaching?" Lucy drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "Books were my escape after the war. When everything familiar was gone, I could disappear into stories, learn about worlds beyond my own. I want to give that to children, especially out here, where opportunities are limited." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "My mother taught me to read." Said a man who can read is never truly alone. She was right, Lucy said. Books are faithful companions. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional pop from the fireplace. Lucy found herself relaxing despite the circumstances that had brought them together. "We should rest," Thomas finally said. "Another long day tomorrow." Lucy settled onto the cot, pulling the rough blanket around her shoulders. "Good night, Thomas." "Good night, Lucy," he replied, his deep voice soft in the darkness. Morning arrived with an unwelcome discovery. As Thomas stepped outside to check on the horses, he spotted 3 riders approaching from the south. He ducked back inside immediately. "Trouble?" Lucy asked, seeing his expression. 3 men coming this way. Could be coincidence, but I doubt it." He moved to his saddlebags and pulled out a second revolver, offering it to her. "You know how to use this." Lucy accepted the weapon with steady hands. "My brother taught me after the war, said a woman alone needs protection." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Stay inside." "I'll try to send them on their way, but if shooting starts, use the back window to get to the horses." Before she could protest, he stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Lucy moved to the small window, positioning herself to see while remaining hidden. Thomas stood casually by the water trough, his stance relaxed, but his hand never far from his holster. The riders approached slowly, and Lucy's heart sank as she recognized Jenkins in the lead. "Fancy meeting you here, Dawson," Jenkins called as they drew up about 20 yards from the shack. "Just passing through," Thomas replied evenly. "Same as you, I expect." Jenkins smiled unpleasantly. "Not quite the same. I'm looking for property that was stolen from me, a schoolteacher about so high, blonde hair." He held his hand to indicate height. "Seen anyone fitting that description?" "Can't say that I have," Thomas said, "but I'm curious what business a man like you has with a schoolteacher." One of Jenkins's companions, a scar-faced man with a shotgun across his lap, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Ain't none of your concern." "See, that's where you're wrong," Thomas said, his voice hardening. "When a man tries to sell a free woman in a territory where slavery's been illegal for years, it becomes everybody's concern." Jenkins's face darkened. I paid good money for her contract. You cost me a profitable transaction." "There is no contract," Thomas replied. "Just kidnapping and attempted human trafficking, both hanging offenses." The third rider, younger than the others but with cold eyes, shifted in his saddle. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you, Dawson. Odds don't look good." Thomas didn't flinch. "I've never been much for gambling, but I'd wager I can put at least 2 of you in the ground before you clear leather. Question is, which 2 wants to die today?" Inside the shack, Lucy held her breath, the revolver steady in her grip as she aimed through the window at Jenkins. She wouldn't let Thomas face this alone. The tension stretched like pulled wire until Jenkins finally laughed, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're bluffing, Cowboy, but we'll play your game for now." He turned his horse. "Enjoy your stay. We'll be seeing you again real soon." The 3 riders departed, maintaining a slow, deliberate pace that spoke more of postponement than retreat. Thomas remained motionless until they disappeared from sight, then quickly returned to the shack. "We need to move. They'll be back, probably with more men." Lucy was already gathering their belongings. "They'll watch the trails north." "That's why we're heading west first," Thomas said. "There's a pass through the hills that'll let us circle around. It'll add a day to our journey, but it's our best chance." They were mounted and moving within 15 minutes, pushing hard across rocky terrain that would be difficult to track. Thomas led them up a steep game trail that zigzagged through pine-covered slopes, occasionally stopping to listen and watch for pursuit. By midday, they'd gained significant elevation, and Thomas finally called a brief halt by a small spring bubbling from between rocks. As the horses drank, Lucy studied the valley spread out below them. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Even with danger on our heels, I can't help but appreciate this view." Thomas glanced at her, struck by how the sunlight caught in her hair, turning it to spun gold. Despite the circumstances, she stood tall, unbroken by fear or hardship. Something stirred in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth he hadn't felt in a very long time. "My father used to say that beauty and danger often walk hand in hand out here," he said. "Makes you appreciate the beauty all the more." Lucy turned to him, a question in her eyes that made his pulse quicken. Before she could speak, however, the distant crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley. "They've picked up our trail," Thomas said grimly. "We need to keep moving." They rode hard through the afternoon, taking the most difficult paths Thomas could find up steep inclines, through dense stands of pine, across rocky outcrops that left minimal tracks. By sunset, they'd crossed the ridgeline and begun their descent down the western slope. "There's a cave system ahead," Thomas explained as darkness fell. "Used by outlaws sometimes, but this time of year it should be empty. We can rest there, then push on before dawn." The cave entrance was partially hidden behind a tumble of boulders, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably, a welcome relief after the day's exertion. Thomas unsaddled the horses while Lucy gathered wood for a small, sheltered fire far enough inside that its light wouldn't be visible from outside. As flames caught and spread, casting dancing shadows on the rock walls, she sank down with a sigh of exhaustion. "Here," Thomas said, offering her his canteen and some jerky. "It's not much, but it'll keep your strength up." "Thank you," she said, their fingers brushing as she accepted the water. Again, that curious spark passed between them, and neither pulled away quite as quickly as propriety might dictate. They ate in companionable silence, the day's dangers temporarily held at bay by stone walls and vigilance. When Lucy finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "I've been wondering something," she said. "Back in Silver Gulch, you could have simply reported Jenkins to the law. Why risk yourself by confronting him directly?" Thomas considered the question, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. Laws stretched thin out here. Sheriff might have acted, might not. By the time anything happened, you could have been sold and gone. He paused. Some things can't wait for justice to catch up. Lucy studied him, seeing beyond the weathered exterior to the principles that guided him. Your father taught you that. He did, Thomas confirmed. He fought for the Union, believed no person should own another. After the war, he came west to start fresh, but he brought those beliefs with him. A faint smile crossed his face. Our ranch was a station on the Underground Railroad of sorts, not for escaped slaves anymore, but for anyone needing sanctuary. Chinese workers fleeing railroad bosses, women escaping bad situations. Anyone society had turned its back on. That explains why you didn't hesitate, Lucy said softly. It's in your blood to help. Thomas looked uncomfortable with her assessment. I just did what needed doing. No, Lucy insisted. What you did was extraordinary, Thomas. Most men would have looked away, told themselves it wasn't their concern. He met her gaze then, something unguarded in his expression. Maybe I couldn't bear the thought of someone putting a price on something so clearly beyond value. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken emotions. Lucy felt her heart quicken as Thomas leaned slightly forward, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips. A stone clattered at the cave entrance, the sound sharp in the silence. Thomas was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. "Stay back," he whispered to Lucy, who had also risen, her own revolver in hand. They listened intently, every sense alert. Another small sound came from the entrance, the scrape of a boot on stone. Thomas motioned for Lucy to move deeper into the cave, positioning himself behind a large boulder with a clear line of fire to the entrance. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, barely breathing. A shadow moved across the cave mouth, too large to be an animal. Thomas aimed carefully. "I know you're in there, Dawson." Jenkins's voice echoed off the stone walls. "We've got the entrance covered. Send out the woman and maybe you walk away from this." "Not going to happen, Jenkins," Thomas called back. "You'd be smart to ride on." A harsh laugh answered him. "You're outnumbered 5-1 now. I've got men positioned all around this hillside. There's no way out for you." Lucy moved to Thomas's side, her face set with determination. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "They'll just wait us out." Thomas nodded grimly. "There's another way," he said softly. "Deeper in the cave system, there's a passage that comes out about half a mile north. It's tight in places, but passable." "What about the horses?" Lucy asked. "We'll have to leave them," Thomas admitted. "But Jenkins won't harm them. Horses are too valuable out here." "We're losing patience, Dawson," Jenkins shouted. "1 minute, then we start shooting." Thomas touched Lucy's arm. "Get ready to move. When I fire, run for the back of the cave. There's a narrow fissure behind that large stalagmite. Follow it as far as you can go." Lucy grabbed his hand. "Together," she insisted. "I won't leave you behind." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, surprise, then respect, and perhaps something deeper. He nodded once. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. Thomas fired 3 rapid shots toward the cave entrance, not aiming to hit but to drive back their pursuers. Answering gunfire erupted immediately, bullets ricocheting off stone as they ran crouched toward the back of the cave. Lucy found the fissure first, squeezing sideways into the narrow opening. Thomas followed, his broader shoulders barely fitting through the tight space. Behind them, voices echoed as Jenkins and his men entered the main cave. The passage twisted downward, growing darker until they could barely see. Thomas produced a small box of matches, striking one to illuminate their path. The flickering light revealed a tunnel that looked natural in some places, man-made in others. "Old mining attempt," Thomas explained in a whisper as they moved forward. "Never yielded anything worth digging for, but left us this escape route." They navigated carefully, the match burning down until Thomas had to light another. The air grew staler as they descended deeper into the earth, and Lucy fought against a rising sense of claustrophobia. "Not much further," Thomas encouraged, sensing her discomfort. "Around this bend, then up a short chimney, and we'll be out." The chimney proved to be a near vertical shaft with crude footholds cut into the rock. Thomas went first, then reached back to help Lucy climb. Her hands were scraped raw by the time they reached the top, but the sight of stars through the opening above made the pain insignificant. They emerged into the cool night air, gulping it gratefully after the stifling confines of the tunnel. They stood in a small ravine, hidden from the main hillside by a stand of juniper trees. "Which way?" Lucy asked, her voice barely audible. Thomas oriented himself, then pointed north. "My ranch is still 2 days' ride on horseback, on foot in this terrain." He didn't finish the thought. "We'll manage," Lucy said firmly. They set off, keeping to the shadows and moving as quietly as possible. The night was clear, the 3/4 moon providing enough light to navigate by while still offering shadowed places to hide. They walked for hours, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest. Dawn found them several miles from the cave, huddled in a dense thicket as they watched the valley below for signs of pursuit. Thomas shared the last of his jerky with Lucy, his expression concerned as he noted her exhaustion. "You should rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." Lucy shook her head stubbornly. "We need to keep moving." "Not if you collapse from exhaustion," Thomas countered. 2 hours, then we'll continue." Too tired to argue further, Lucy leaned against a tree trunk, intending only to close her eyes for a moment. She was asleep almost instantly. Thomas watched her, a protective tenderness washing over him. In just 2 days, this remarkable woman had upended his carefully ordered existence. He'd spent years alone at Twin Pines, convinced that solitude was his natural state. Now, the thought of returning to that emptiness after delivering Lucy safely to Laramie left an unexpected hollowness in his chest. He turned his attention outward, scanning their surroundings with practiced vigilance. No sign of Jenkins and his men yet, but Thomas harbored no illusions that they'd given up the chase. The slave trader had too much pride and too much potential profit invested in recapturing Lucy. She slept for nearly 3 hours before waking with a start. "How long?" she asked, immediately dismayed. "Not long enough," Thomas replied, "but we should move. There's a homestead about 5 miles north, man named Erickson. He's a friend will help us." They set off again, the day growing hotter as the sun climbed. Lucy kept pace without complaint, though Thomas could see the toll their journey was taking. Her once fine dress was torn and dirty, her boots worn at the heels, but her spine remained straight, her steps determined. By mid-afternoon, they spotted smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. The Erickson homestead came into view as they crested a small rise, a sturdy cabin without buildings, a corral containing several horses, and fields of wheat rippling in the breeze. Thomas approached cautiously, alert for any sign of danger, but the homestead appeared peaceful. A large man with a bushy beard emerged from the barn as they drew near, a rifle held ready but not aimed. "That's far enough," he called. Then, squinting, Thomas Dawson." "It's me, Eric," Thomas confirmed, raising his empty hands. "We're in some trouble and could use your help." The homesteader lowered his rifle immediately. "Come on in, then. Any friend of Jacob Dawson's son is welcome here." Inside the cabin, Eric's wife Marta fussed over Lucy, providing clean water, food, and a spare dress that was too large but blessedly clean. Thomas explained their situation while Eric listened gravely. "Jenkins is bad business," the homesteader said when Thomas finished. "He's got connections all through these parts, crooked lawmen, hired guns. He doesn't take kindly to being crossed. We need horses," Thomas said, "and maybe a day's rest before we push on to Twin Pines." Eric nodded. "You can have the horses." As for rest, he glanced at Lucy, who was helping Marta with dinner preparations. "The lady certainly looks like she could use it, but I can't guarantee your safety here for long. News travels fast and Jenkins has eyes everywhere." "One night," Thomas decided. "We'll leave before dawn." After the best meal they'd had in days, Lucy retreated to the small room Marta had prepared for her. Thomas sat at the kitchen table with Eric, discussing routes and potential dangers ahead. "There's something else you should know," Eric said, his voice lowered. "Word is Jenkins has put a bounty on both your heads. 500 for the woman, alive only. 200 for you, dead or alive." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Figures." Eric leaned forward. "Why risk yourself for her, Thomas? You've avoided entanglements for years. What makes this woman different?" Thomas stared into his coffee cup, unable to articulate the complex emotions Lucy stirred in him. "She needed help," he said simply. "Plenty of folks need help," Eric pressed. "You don't risk your life for all of them." Before Thomas could respond, a soft voice came from the doorway. "I've been wondering the same thing." Both men looked up to find Lucy standing there, her borrowed dress cinched with a belt to better fit her slender frame, her damp hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Thomas felt his breath catch at the sight. Eric glanced between them, then stood with a knowing smile. "Think I'll check on the horses before turning in," he said, tactfully exiting through the back door. Lucy took his vacated chair, her green eyes steady on Thomas's face. "You've put yourself in tremendous danger for me." "I need to understand why." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Like I told Eric, you needed help. There's more to it than that," Lucy insisted gently. "I've seen how you look at me when you think I'm not watching." Heat crept up Thomas's neck. "I apologize if I've been improper." "No," Lucy interrupted, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "That's not what I meant at all." Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to hum with unspoken possibilities. Thomas found himself turning his hand to clasp hers, her skin soft against his calloused palm. "I've spent most of my life alone," he said finally, the words coming slowly. "Thought that was how it was meant to be. Then I saw you on that platform with that price tag around your neck and something shifted." He struggled to find the right words. "It wasn't just that selling you was wrong. It was the idea that anyone could think they could put a value on you at all." Lucy's eyes shimmered in the lamplight. "And what do you see when you look at me, Thomas Dawson?" He swallowed hard. "I see courage, intelligence, kindness, despite everything you've endured. I see a woman who could walk into hell with her head high and come out the other side stronger for it." His voice dropped lower. "I see someone I can't imagine not knowing anymore." Lucy's grip on his hand tightened. "I've lost everything once before. My home, my family, everything familiar. I built a new life from those ashes. I thought I knew what strength was." She paused. "But watching you stand against Jenkins and his men, risking everything for a stranger, that showed me what true courage looks like." "Lucy," Thomas began, but words failed him. She smiled softly. "We've known each other mere days, yet I feel I've known you all my life." "Is that strange?" "If it is," Thomas replied, "then we're both touched by the same madness." Lucy stood, still holding his hand, and moved around the table until she stood beside him. Thomas rose to meet her, their bodies close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," she whispered. "But I know that meeting you has changed everything for me." Thomas raised his hand to gently touch her cheek. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The space between them vanished as Lucy leaned up on her toes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively, but quickly deepened, as years of solitude and days of shared danger crystallized into something neither had expected to find. When they finally parted, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "We should rest," he said reluctantly. "Long ride tomorrow." Lucy nodded but made no move to step away. "Thomas," she said softly, "whatever happens, I want you to know that what you did in Silver Gulch, tearing away that price tag and standing up for my worth, it was the most valiant thing anyone has ever done for me." He kissed her again, gently this time. "Get some sleep, Lucy. I'll be right here if you need me." Dawn came too quickly, gray light filtering through the cabin's small windows as Thomas helped Eric saddle two sturdy horses. Lucy emerged from the cabin dressed in her borrowed clothes, a small bundle of provisions Marta had insisted on providing clutched in her arms. "The North Trail will be your best bet," Eric advised as they mounted up. "It's longer, but less traveled. You should reach Twin Pines by tomorrow evening if you push hard." Thomas clasped the homesteader's hand firmly. "I owe you, Eric." "You owe me nothing," Eric replied. "Your father would have done the same for me." They set off as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, riding at a steady pace through rolling hills covered in sage and scrub. The day grew hot quickly, but the horses were fresh and made good time. By midday, they'd covered nearly 15 miles, stopping briefly at a small creek to water the horses and eat some of Marta's bread and cheese. Thomas seemed increasingly alert, scanning their surroundings constantly. "You're worried," Lucy observed. "It's too quiet," Thomas replied. "Jenkins should have caught up to us by now, or at least sent men ahead to cut us off." "Maybe we lost them," Lucy suggested without much conviction. Thomas shook his head. "Men like Jenkins don't give up that easily, especially not when their pride is wounded." He remounted his horse. "We should keep moving." They rode through the afternoon, the terrain gradually changing as they moved northward. The scrubland gave way to more fertile valleys, with stands of cottonwood marking the courses of streams and small rivers. In the distance, the mountains that marked the northern boundary of Thomas's ranch became visible. "We're getting close to my land," Thomas said as evening approached. "Another 15 miles or so." Lucy felt a surge of hope. "We might make it by nightfall if we push on." Thomas nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Let's cross that ridge ahead, then we can follow the valley floor all the way to Twin Pines." They urged their horses up the gentle slope, reaching the crest just as the sun began to set. Thomas reined in suddenly, his hand moving to his gun. "What is it?" Lucy asked, alarmed. "Down there," Thomas said grimly, pointing to the valley below. Lucy followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. A group of riders, at least 8 men, had made camp at the valley entrance, effectively blocking their path to Twin Pines. "Jenkins," she whispered. "And his men," Thomas confirmed. "Somehow they got ahead of us." "What do we do now?" Thomas studied the situation, calculating options. "We can try to circle around, but it would add another day to our journey and we'd be traveling at night through rough country. Or—" Lucy pressed, sensing he had another idea. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Or we end this, now." "How?" "I ride down there and settle things with Jenkins once and for all." Lucy's eyes widened in alarm. "That's suicide. There are at least 8 of them." 9, Thomas corrected grimly. "And you're right. A direct confrontation would be foolish." He thought for a moment. "But there might be another way." As darkness fell, they retreated from the ridgeline and made a cold camp in a small copse of trees, discussing Thomas's plan in hushed voices. Lucy listened with growing concern as he outlined a dangerous strategy. "It's too risky," she argued. "Let's go around. Another day won't matter if we're alive at the end of it." Thomas shook his head. "They've positioned themselves too well. Even if we circle around, they'll have men watching all approaches to Twin Pines. This ends tonight, one way or another." Lucy studied his face in the dim starlight, recognizing the determination set in his features. "Then I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "Absolutely not," Thomas replied immediately. "You'll stay here with the horses, ready to ride if things go wrong, and leave you to face them alone. I won't do it." Lucy's voice was steel beneath silk. "I can shoot, Thomas, you've seen that, and 2 guns are better than 1. They argued in fierce whispers until Thomas finally conceded, recognizing the same stubborn resolve in Lucy that he possessed himself. "Stay close and do exactly as I say," he finally agreed. "One wrong move down there could get us both killed." Under cover of darkness, they approached Jenkins's camp from the east, leaving their horses tethered a safe distance away. The men had built a large fire, its flames casting long shadows that Thomas and Lucy used for cover as they crept closer. Jenkins sat apart from his men, smoking a cigar as he studied a map spread across his lap. The others lounged around the fire, passing a bottle and playing cards. 2 men stood guard, but their attention was directed mainly toward the trail from the north, the direction they expected Thomas and Lucy to come from. "Remember the plan," Thomas whispered, as they positioned themselves behind a large boulder about 30 yards from the camp. "I'll create a distraction on the far side. When they investigate, you slip in and get to Jenkins. Put your gun to his head and don't hesitate to use it if necessary." Lucy nodded, her heart pounding but her hands steady. "Be careful," she whispered. Thomas touched her cheek briefly. "You too." He disappeared into the darkness, circling wide around the camp toward the western perimeter. Lucy watched the camp intently, counting the seconds until Thomas would make his move. A sudden crash and shout from the far side of the camp sent the men scrambling. Jenkins stood, barking orders as several of his men grabbed rifles and ran toward the disturbance. The 2 guards remained at their posts, but turned their attention toward the commotion. Lucy seized her moment, darting from shadow to shadow until she reached Jenkins's tent. The slave trader had moved a few steps away, peering into the darkness where his men had disappeared. Lucy approached silently from behind, pressing her revolver firmly against the base of his skull. "Don't move," she hissed, "and don't call out or you're dead." Jenkins froze. "Well, well," he said softly, "the schoolteacher has teeth." "Tell your men to stand down," Lucy commanded. "Now, or what?" Jenkins asked, his voice calm despite the gun at his head. "You'll shoot me. I don't think you have it in you, schoolteacher." "Try me," Lucy replied coldly. "After what you did to me, I'd sleep just fine tonight." Something in her tone must have convinced him because Jenkins slowly raised his hands. "Carver, Jackson," he called to the guards. "Stand down. We have a situation here." The guards turned, raising their rifles when they saw Lucy. "Drop them," Lucy ordered, "or your boss gets a third eye." The men hesitated, looking to Jenkins for guidance. "Do as she says," Jenkins told them reluctantly. The guards lowered their weapons to the ground. From the darkness beyond the camp, Thomas's voice rang out. "The rest of you throw down your guns and come back to the fire. Hands where I can see them." One by one, the remaining men emerged from the shadows, hands raised, with Thomas following behind, his Colt trained on them. He directed them to join the guards by the fire, keeping a safe distance. "You've played this well," Jenkins acknowledged as Thomas approached. "But what now? You can't kill us all." "Don't need to," Thomas replied evenly. "Just you." Jenkins's smug expression faltered slightly. "Murder's a hanging offense, Dawson." So is slave trading, Thomas countered. I reckon any jury in the territory would call it self-defense once they heard what you've been up to. What do you want? Jenkins asked, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. Thomas met Lucy's eyes over Jenkins's shoulder, something unspoken passing between them. I want you to understand something, he said to Jenkins. This woman isn't property. She can't be bought or sold. No price could ever touch her true worth. Fine sentiments, Jenkins sneered, but business is business. Not this kind, Thomas said firmly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write out a statement confessing to kidnapping Miss Carter and attempting to sell her. You're going to sign it, and then you and your men are going to ride south and never show your faces in this territory again. Jenkins laughed bitterly. Or what? Thomas's expression hardened. Or I'll save the hangman some trouble. The slave trader studied Thomas's face, apparently seeing something there that convinced him the cowboy wasn't bluffing. Fine, he spat. I'll write your damned confession. Under Thomas's watchful eye, Jenkins penned a detailed account of his crimes. When he finished, Thomas took the paper and verified its contents. Now mount up, Thomas ordered Jenkins and his men. Ride south and don't stop until you've crossed the territorial line. This isn't over, Dawson, Jenkins warned as he climbed into his saddle. For your sake, it better be, Thomas replied, because if I ever see you again, I won't be so merciful. They watched as Jenkins and his men rode away, disappearing into the darkness. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Lucy lower her gun, her hands suddenly trembling with delayed reaction. Thomas was at her side instantly, his arm around her shoulders. You were magnificent, he said softly. Lucy leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. I was terrified. Couldn't tell, Thomas said with genuine admiration. You faced down Jenkins like you were born to it. They collected their horses and made camp there for the night, neither wanting to travel further in the darkness. As they sat before a small fire, Thomas studying Jenkins's confession, Lucy found herself watching him, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the way firelight played across his features. You think he'll stay away? She asked finally. Thomas carefully folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. This confession gives us leverage. If he comes back, we can take it to the territorial marshal. Jenkins has enemies, powerful ones who'd be happy to see him hang. He's smart enough to know when to cut his losses. Lucy nodded, accepting his assessment. Tomorrow we reach your ranch. By midday, Thomas confirmed. Twin Pines is just beyond that northern ridge. He hesitated, then added, Lucy, once we're there, you need to think about what comes next. Laramie might not be safe if Jenkins decides the confession isn't enough deterrent. I still want to teach, she said firmly. Whether in Laramie or somewhere else, that hasn't changed. Thomas stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. There's a small school at Cooperville, about 10 miles from Twin Pines. Last I heard, they were looking for a teacher. Lucy looked at him sharply. Are you suggesting I stay? I'm suggesting you have options, Thomas replied carefully. Whatever you decide, I'll support. The unspoken question hung between them, charged with possibility. Lucy moved closer until their shoulders touched. What if I want to stay? She asked softly. Not just near Twin Pines, but with you. Thomas turned to her, hope and uncertainty warring in his eyes. Lucy, we've known each other barely a week. What I feel for you is powerful, but I won't ask you to make decisions based on emotions running high after danger. Lucy smiled, touching his face gently. Thomas Dawson, I've spent my entire adult life making careful, rational decisions. For once, I want to follow my heart. She leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything words could not. When they parted, Thomas's eyes were bright with emotion. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "I've never been more certain of anything," Lucy replied. "You saw my worth when others tried to diminish it. You risked everything to protect a stranger. How could I not fall in love with such a man?" Thomas gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Lucy Carter," he whispered against her hair. "I think I have since the moment I saw you stand defiant on that auction block, refusing to be broken." They held each other as the fire burned low, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient dance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, decisions to be made, a future to build. But tonight, in each other's arms, they had found something rare and precious, a love born in danger but destined to flourish in peace. Morning dawned clear and bright, promise hanging in the air as they rode the final miles to Twin Pines. They crested a rise and Thomas reined in his horse, gesturing to the valley below. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "Home." Lucy followed his gaze, taking in the sprawling ranch spread across the valley floor. A two-story house of weathered wood stood surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and meadows where cattle grazed. Beyond, twin pine-covered peaks rose against the sky, giving the ranch its name. "It's beautiful," Lucy breathed. Thomas smiled, watching her reaction. "It's not grand, but it's good land." "It's perfect," she said sincerely. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the ranch house, a wizened older man emerged onto the porch, shading his eyes against the sun. "'Bout time you got back," he called gruffly. "Was about to send out a search party." "Hank," Thomas greeted him as they dismounted. "This is Miss Lucy Carter. Lucy, this is Hank Morgan, my foreman and the closest thing to family I have left." Hank's weathered face split into a grin as he tipped his hat to Lucy. "Madam, welcome to Twin Pines." "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," Lucy replied warmly. "I've heard so much about this place." "Have you now?" Hank shot a curious look at Thomas. "Boss doesn't usually talk much about home when he's out and about." "It's a long story," Thomas said, leading the horses toward the stable. "I'll fill you in later." Over the next few days, Lucy settled into life at Twin Pines. Thomas showed her every aspect of the ranch, from the spring-fed streams that watered the cattle to the small apple orchard his mother had planted years ago. With each passing hour, Lucy fell more deeply in love not just with Thomas, but with the land itself, with the rhythm of ranch life, with the sense of belonging she felt here. A week after their arrival, Thomas rode into Cooperville to inquire about the teaching position. He returned with news that the school board was eager to meet Lucy and would likely offer her the job immediately. "You could start with the fall term," he told her as they sat on the porch swing that evening, watching the sunset paint the Twin Peaks in gold and crimson. "It's only a few weeks away." Lucy leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she'd never thought possible. "I'd like that, teaching during the day, coming home to you in the evenings." Thomas's arm tightened around her. "Home," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." Lucy turned to face him. "Thomas, are we rushing this? A part of me says we should wait, be sensible. But then I remember how quickly life can change, how easily happiness can slip away if not grasped firmly with both hands." Thomas took her hands in his. "Lucy Carter, I've lived 30 years on this earth. I've seen good times and bad, known joy and sorrow, but I've never known anyone like you." He drew a deep breath. "I don't have pretty words or grand gestures. All I have is this ranch, these hands, and a heart that's yours completely. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you right here." Tears shimmered in Lucy's eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" In answer, Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Pa gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found a woman worthy of wearing it." He held it out to her. "I can't think of anyone more worthy than you." Lucy extended her trembling hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. "Yes, Thomas Dawson, I will marry you." Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a defiance against all the forces that had tried to keep them apart. When they finally parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "No price could ever touch your worth," he murmured, echoing the words he'd spoken on that fateful day in Silver Gulch. "But I'll spend my lifetime trying to deserve you." 2 weeks later, they were married in a simple ceremony at the Twin Pines Ranch house. Hank stood as Thomas's best man, while Marta Erickson, who had traveled with her husband for the occasion, attended Lucy. The territorial judge who performed the ceremony also witnessed Jenkins's confession, promising to file it with the federal marshal's office as additional insurance against future trouble. As autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold, Lucy began teaching at the Cooperville school. The children quickly came to adore their new teacher, who brought stories from faraway places and a passionate belief in the power of education to transform lives. Word of Jenkins's confrontation with Thomas had spread, and rather than diminishing the Cowboy's standing in the community, it had elevated him. Many who had previously viewed the Dawson Ranch with mild suspicion due to its reputation as a haven for outcasts now spoke of Thomas with newfound respect. One crisp October evening, as Lucy sat grading papers at the kitchen table, Thomas came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots. "Early storm coming," he reported, hanging his coat by the door. "Cattle are all in the south pasture, should be fine." Lucy looked up with a smile that still made his heart skip a beat. "I've been thinking," she said as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "Dangerous occupation," Thomas teased, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. "Very funny," she replied, swatting his arm playfully. "I'm serious. I've been thinking about your father's legacy, how Twin Pines was a place of sanctuary." Thomas sat across from her, curious. "What about it?" "I think we should continue that tradition," Lucy said earnestly. "There are children in this territory, orphans, half-breeds, runaways who have nowhere to go. What if we opened our home to them? Not just as a temporary shelter, but as a real home." Thomas considered her suggestion, seeing the passion in her eyes. "You're talking about adopting, eventually, perhaps. But I was thinking more broadly at first. We have space, resources. I could teach them here at the ranch until they're ready for the town school." She reached for his hand. "What do you think?" Thomas squeezed her fingers, marveling at the woman he'd married. "I think my father would be proud to see his work continued, and I can't think of a better mother for children who need one." Lucy's face lit up. "Really? You're not just agreeing to make me happy?" "I'm agreeing because it's the right thing to do," Thomas replied sincerely. "And because seeing you happy makes me happy." The first child came to them that winter, a half-Cheyenne boy named Charlie, whose mother had died of pneumonia and whose white father wanted nothing to do with him. 10 years old and wary of strangers, he gradually thawed under Lucy's gentle persistence and Thomas's matter-of-fact acceptance. By spring, 2 more children had joined them, sisters whose parents had died in a flash flood, leaving them with no relatives willing to take them in. Sarah, 12, and Emma, 8, brought laughter back to rooms that had stood silent for too long. With each passing season, the family grew. Thomas expanded the ranch house, adding rooms for the children and eventually a proper schoolroom where Lucy taught them, until they were ready to attend the town school. Some stayed for months, others for years, but all carried with them the knowledge that they had been valued, had been seen as worthwhile regardless of their origins or circumstances. 5 years after their wedding, Lucy gave birth to their first biological child, a daughter they named Grace, after Thomas's mother. 2 years later, a son joined the family, named Jacob after Thomas's father. Yet between the biological and adopted children, they made no distinction in their love and care. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Lucy with a locket containing miniature portraits of them both, engraved with the words that had brought them together. No price could touch her worth. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children, both those born to them and those who had come to them through other paths playing in the twilight, Lucy leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine our life would be like this?" she asked softly. Thomas's arm tightened around her waist. "Not in my wildest dreams. I thought I was meant to live alone, to keep to myself." He kissed her temple. "I thank God every day that I was in Silver Gulch that morning." Lucy turned her face up to his, the years having only deepened her beauty in his eyes. "So do I," she whispered before their lips met in a kiss, still charged with the same passion that had first drawn them together. From the yard came the sounds of children's laughter, of a family forged not by obligation or blood alone, but by choice and love and the unshakable belief in every person's inherent, priceless worth. In the distance, the twin pines stood sentinel against the darkening sky, witnesses to a love that had begun with a torn price tag and a cowboy's stand against injustice, a love that had flourished to create not just a marriage, but a legacy that would endure long after they were gone.